Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble! Get ready to rumble!
Sexting is the sexier side of media industries. We are here to evaluate that it is actually a cultural norm and not deviant behavior at all. It is what most teens and adults, or anyone with a cell phone, is up to, and they whack away at the keyboard to produce some sort of sexual message or maybe even a picture in desperate hopes that the receiver will be turned on. They're definitely hoping that they at least won't be disgusted. It's a worldwide issue, and as it turns out, it's not just a Mr. Wiener issue in North America, but cases like his and in cases of child pornography also need to be considered because this is a case where sexting is not acceptable. A formal and operational definition and a brief history is brought to us by Nina Funnell. She is a researcher at the University of New South Wales, and she is currently focused on studying the patterns of teens and their sexting behaviors. Funnell sees it as coming about in the early part of the century, but the meaning has evolved over time. Initially, it referred to people using their mobile phones to organize a sex date, but over time the term evolved to refer to sending sexually explicit or sexually suggestive messages. As the technology evolved and more people have mobile phone cameras, and as the capacity to store and transfer large amounts of data has increased, sexting as a term has evolved to also refer to the electronic transfer of nude and semi-nude images via mobile phones. Very similar to technology, our behaviors in the bedroom are changing as well. Terry Day, law professor at many universities, including Yale, states that 21st century technology has transformed human relationships. By virtue of email, text, Twitter, Skype, instant messenger, or any other form of electronic communication, people meet and socially interact in cyberspace. It is a fast-paced, technologically driven era where most relationships, whether personal or business, depend on some form of electronic or virtual interaction. To answer the question, why is it here, from last video, pretty much sums it up. Almost all of the relationships that we have every day consist of an electronic component, where we email, text, or phone all the people we work with, and our friends are filed away in our phones or online. Then Day continues with, even the relationships we hold with our lovers are changing, and that sexting has become commonplace among teenagers as well, which is now a generation built on instant gratification and the here and now. An example of this need for immediate gratification and sexting behavior is a study that Day brings forward where teens were asked about their sexting behaviors, and the overall response was that 20% of teens that were asked had sent nude or almost nude photos of themselves. They claimed it was to be fun and flirtatious with their boyfriends or someone that they wanted to hook up with in the future. So Day finishes by saying that this drive to be sexual is as old as Adam and Eve, and I would agree with him. I think it's pretty instinctual to want to be fun and sexy and flirtatious with your partner. The downside is that children are doing this. The study was done with teens. Most of these people were not adults, and the receivers could be charged with child pornography. It is totally normal for consenting adults to take part in this, but children need to realize the consequences before they start something bigger than they'd ever expect. And now we'll look at a few cases.
First example of the other side of sexting is when it becomes a criminal charge. Zailu Zhang, assistant director at Lucenter Academy for Human Rights Implementation, examines how the legal system can be used to handle the problem of sexting. She examines the case of a high school student versus the state of Florida who was charged with knowingly producing, directing, or promoting a photograph or representation that contains sexual content in violation of Florida state law. The phenomenon has evolved into a major social problem, exposing children to a variety of dangers, which include embarrassment, harassment, bullying, exposure, and possibly appearing on the radar of a possible predator. This case shows how the legal system is being used in the United States to battle the phenomenon of sexting. The section states, a person guilty of promoting a sexual performance by a child when, knowing the character and content thereof, he or she produces, directs, or promotes any performance which includes sexual content by a child less than 18 years of age. Whoever violates this subsection is guilty of a felony in the second degree. This case is unique because it is actually charging a teenager who knowingly produced sexually explicit images of herself with a criminal offense. The legal system is a strong tool that can be used to halt this type of behavior, as children participating in the act of sexting could face severe legal ramifications. Although the charges were eventually dropped, the state of Florida released a statement saying, "The trial court, in dismissing her motion, noted that the compelling state interest here was to protect minors from sexual exploitation, regardless of the age of the person doing the exploitation." It is also stated that it was the least intrusive means of furthering the state's compelling interest. This shows how the United States is using the power of the legal system to try to stop the media phenomenon of sexting. In this particular case, the state of Florida actually decided to take it easy on the teenager, making an example out of this case, that the act of sexting can have severe legal ramifications for all parties involved. Other criminal justice responses can be examined to show how the legal system is one avenue governments are using to halt the transmission of sexually explicit images between minors, under the excuse of sexting. Nigel Stone, who previously worked in the probation service and currently teaches on crime and punishment and criminology at the University of East Anglia, explores different methods legal systems can use in order to combat the problem of sexting. Stone believes that the criminal justice systems in the United States have handed out abusive consequences to adolescents, and where in some cases punishments do not fit the crime, believing that the use of conventional child pornography legislation can be inappropriately heavy-handed and draconian. Stone believes that charging a minor with possession of child pornography can be harsh. He explains that those who are charged with sexting, such as the teens charged by the state of Florida, should apply the First Amendment right to free speech given to them by the Constitution. Stone demonstrates how other charges can be used, which are less severe than child pornography charges, still deter children away from the act of sexting. Some alternative charges Stone suggests that have been used rather than child pornography charges include sexual exploitation of a minor and disseminating obscene material to children. While these charges still pack quite the legal punch, they are not quite as severe as child porn charges. As a scholar of criminal justice, Stone hopes that if the trend of prosecution is to hit the United Kingdom like it has in the United States, developing law, policy, and guidance in the United Kingdom gives modest grounds for hope that the law's application of sexting might be more principled and less unpredictable, erratic, or draconian than appears to be the case in the United States.
Child pornography, as a result of what seemed like harmless sexting, has had serious repercussions. Another downfall is when adults use it inappropriately. For example, public figures harassing people with sexual messages, and the feelings were definitely not mutual. Laura Juntunen and Dr. Esa Valavaronen, researchers of communications at the University of Helsinki, wrote an article concerning political figures being caught with their virtual pants down. They wrote, "This was not the first time the foreign minister was in the headlines because of his texting. The first indiscretions happened in 2001, again in 2005. Several young models came out into the public and said they had been bombarded with his texts." Those are examples of how it is bad and unacceptable. Robert Richards, news reporter and writer about law in Pennsylvania, discusses why we cannot seem to come to an agreement on the legalities of sexting when it is considered deviant. In his article, When Sex and Cell Phones Collide, he says, "What makes sexting so ripe for legal discussion is that it represents a social and technological phenomena that has overstepped the law, as there seems to be little or no agreement among authorities on how to proceed when sexting cases cross their desks." Similar to a speech that Michael Geist, professor of law at University of Ottawa, gave when he talks about international copyright policy needing to be so general it becomes useless and obsolete. The international policy on sexting is also not progressing in any way because no one is willing to tackle the problem legally, and meanwhile children are running rampant being sexually active on their phones. Although it is very easy to find examples of why people shouldn't be taking part in sexting, it is also too easy to get caught up in excuses for not doing it and forgetting why it's good. It has the ability to connect couples that are farther away from each other and add a little spice to a relationship. As Funnel brings up, it is important to note that sexting does not necessarily involve bullying or harassment. For some young people, the exchange of sexual texts and images is embedded in a wider system of friendship, courtship, and social bonding. We agree with Funnel. Sexting is absolutely a larger part of our current society and not deviant or abnormal. The textbook Abnormal Psychology states that abnormal sex is any sexual behavior that people do not wish to engage in themselves. So just because a few people have taken it too far, or that some people believe it is not proper sexual conduct, doesn't mean that sexting is a normal reality for many people. Another thing to keep in mind is from the text Abnormal Psychology, is that it states some norms for sexual behaviors will change with time. Since the times are certainly changing on the technological front, why not send a few nudie pics of yourself around if that's what turns your crank?